أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين بعد الخلافة أجمعين سيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا مولانا وحبيب قلوبنا بالقاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين اصطفاهم الله أجمعين. أما بعد فقال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
My respected brothers and sisters, Abidjwal, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to thank dear Sheikh and Sister Zainab for their beautiful presentation. I don't deserve as much praise, of course not, but thank you anyway for that. I'd like to start by saying that, continuing from our discussion from yesterday, it's quite intriguing and interesting when we examine the perspectives and the way we look at things. It's a simple perspective change which can get us to see something in a completely different way. And this perspective, really, if you look at it, doesn't build in an instant or a moment. As much as when we pray, prayer is a very powerful force. The epiphany moments which change our lives and make us the people who we are typically the moments which are in between or after our prayer. The epiphany moments are typically the moments which are after we finish fasting. The epiphany moments or the aha moment, I've really realized it and I think I've got an understanding of the way the system works, is typically that moment after where I really examine something in my day-to-day experience. Ibadah and worship is extremely powerful. But it's the reflection that the human being does which really brings about that change. And we can say that salah is an extremely powerful force, which it is a reminder. But what really makes salah what it is, and what really makes our worship what it is, as much as we say Ramadan is the month of worship, is a reflection that we have in the thinking which we're able to gauge. Let's say Imam Khomeini says something quite phenomenal. They saw him once praying a bit faster, and he was asked, they said to him, well, why are you praying a bit faster? And his reply was that salah really starts and begins once I finish my salah. To the idea that true salah and true thinking isn't just going up and down in a mechanical movement for 60 or 70 years in my life, nor is it opening a book and reading the verses over and over and over again. But it's that aha or that epiphany moment that I get after I've finished and after I've contemplated on what I've just recited. And that really makes the human being who he is. Simple contemplative moments, things which really change us or change our perspectives, are what we really need. Let me give you a basic example. If we ever look at our existence as human beings, whether we've lived on this earth for as long as scientists have concluded, something to note or to gauge, and I was thinking about this as I came today driving here, is it's quite intriguing and interesting, the fact or the idea that at one point you and I weren't existent and we do exist now. To think about it, that if somebody's sitting here who's a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old, 19 years before this day, you never really existed, and the mention of your name was never really there. And I speak for myself at the frontmost position, is that years before I was born, I wasn't even worth to be mentioning. I was actually non-existent, and somehow I came from non-existence into existence. And that's the situation of mankind. You and I at one point weren't even worth mentioning. If someone was to come to our fathers or our mothers 20 years back, if we're 20 years old, and say, well, how is your son doing, or how is your daughter doing? The father's reaction would be to laugh, because I don't have a son yet, and he's not even worth mentioning. That we were so we were so small or so minute or so unworthy, we can say that our name or our mention was simply something which would make a person laugh, because we were never even existent. And now we are humans which exist. We laugh, we play, we smile, we cry, we do so many other things. And to see that at one point I was nothing and I became something, for all those miracle hoarders out there, because a lot of the times the best way for people to understand things is through a miracle. And we ask this basic question, I'd like to tackle this kind of in brief, is that as many times as people come towards religion and they say, well, if the Quran's got so many miracles, or if human beings, we speak of God as this miraculous being who brings thunderbolts down to people and sends prophets with arcs and sends other prophets with sticks which turn to snakes, and other prophets have a chance to speak to God, others do some of the craziest feats and tricks, then what's happening now? Why isn't God still sending us miracles? Why can He expect me to believe the same way that the person believed 1400 years ago or 2000 years ago when they had a miracle and I don't have anything? All I've got in front of me is a book, and mind you, some of us might not even be able to read Arabic, and I say this book looks just like this book, so there's really no difference in front of me. And I'm expected to have some sort of belief system when there's really no miracle. And the question comes up, specifically within the atheistic argument, where are all the miracles of God? Why doesn't God send us miracles? Why doesn't He just communicate with us and get it over with? Just let Him come down to the system and interact with us in some way so we know He's out there somewhere, so He's understood. Not that He's hiding behind a cloud and we're here guessing and saying, well, does He exist? Does He not exist? Well, I don't know. Does He? Look at all the evil that's in the world. Can He really let so many people die? And we ask all these basic human questions. And it's intriguing because what's happened is we've put so much value in the concept of a miracle as a Muslim community when miracles in reality are so petty. Now to some might be shocked, how can a miracle be petty? How can bringing down an angel from the sky be petty? Or how can taking a ship and letting it, building a huge ship and putting all the animals in there, how can that be something petty? Or how can it be that an angel comes down to the earth as a petty thing? Or how can a prophet bring people back to life as something very petty? And the answer is yes. Miracles are extremely petty relative to what we have today. And speaking with regards to the situation of the people which were living there and the proof of the people's reactions and what they did, will come to a conclusion knowing that miracles are extremely simple and they are so simple-minded that we are meant to adhere and understand things on such a higher level than miracles. It's not that my belief is based on a miracle if I see a miracle or if I don't see a miracle. I can quite honestly argue that the fact that I was nothing and I became something is in itself the biggest miracle. Because if we were to say that something was to appear from nothing, is that even possible? And the very fact that you and I at one point in my introduction I said we were nothing and we became something is proof positive that at one point I was nothing and I became something. And that's showing me that if I want a miracle, simplest, basic, most simple level of miracle, as we can call it, is look in the mirror and you as a human being are a miracle on a basic level, on a very, very small level. Now, let's look further in advance. When we look at miracles, we think that we put so much emphasis on a miracle. And this miracle issue causes problems for people. And here's why. It causes problems for people because a lot of the times we find things very hard to believe as humans. Being indulged in a world which is so scientifically accurate and being part of a system where everything is so mechanically structured and so measured to the inch, to the centimeter, and rightfully so, we have the right to question and ask, is it possible for such feats of nature to occur? Is it really possible? Okay? And the conclusion that I want to come with is not that yes, miracles are possible, or no, miracles are not possible, and let me stick some scientific figures in here and there for you so you can see that it's possible for a man to wake a human being up from the dead. Or we go past that and we say all miracles are part of a material system, but we just haven't discovered them yet. We'll give these different proofs. And I'd like to come to a conclusion in tonight's discussion that it's irrelevant whether this miracle is true or whether it's not true, because with regards to the change that it brings to the people, relative to the change that it has, that's its importance. But let me note something. Miracles are relative to the time that the people live in and the situation that they're based off of. Meaning, a person 50 years ago, thinking of a concept like a cell phone, seems extremely miraculous. Is it possible for us as humans to take a device in our hands and be able to communicate with a human being thousands of miles away through my cell phone? It's a miracle. So miracles are extremely relative. But if you look at the Quran, it seems as if these miracles don't really mean anything to the people who are seeing them. There are specific individuals who are changed through miracles. But vast majority of the individuals in the Quran who see miracles, it seems as if it's not that they're only in disbelief, but they become stupider in their belief, some of them. Let me give a brief example. If you look at, for example, the Quranic context which speaks about Moses and Bani Israel. And Musa crosses the sea and he rips this sea right in half. and the sea becomes very clear. They walk through the sea. And I'd like you to imagine this as I'm saying this, because seeing a sea split right in front of you is no joke. If somebody walks into a sea and the sea opens, like this person is probably Jesus Christ. Something is going on here. Because it's very clear, it's a huge task. Not only that, but now they walk down the sea, they continue down. Allah Azza wa Jalla grants them so many different things. They see the staff of Moses, they see his glowing hand, they realize that he talks to God, he brings them different discussions from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And after seeing all of these different things, all of these different miracles, they still go and they worship a calf. Not a normal calf, but a calf which is made out of gold. And the stupidity is, when they create this calf, there is a wind blowing through the calf because there were holes inside of the calf, and it was making a loud booing noise, and they thought that this must be God because it's making a noise. Look at the stupidity of certain individuals. And we think, well, what happened to the miracle? They just saw the sea being split. And it's interesting because a Jewish man comes to Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he looks at him, he says to him, Ali, you guys and your prophet, there's a clear issue with you guys. He says, why? He says, because no longer, as your prophet died, you guys started fighting over who should take the khilafah, you or this guy or that guy, you guys are all fighting about it. And Imam Ali looks at him and he says to him, it's not that we fought over the principle of our messenger, but we are disputing an issue which he brought forward to us and not him himself. He said, but Bani Israel, the minute you walked out of the sea and your feet weren't even still dry from the wetness of the water and salt was still between your toes because you had walked through the ocean, you guys immediately disbelieved in your prophet. And it's a reality. And we ask a question, if miracles were of such importance to us as human beings, then why is it that we see hordes and hordes and hordes of humans who are not believing in miracles? Matter of fact, they are running away from some sort of belief. And what that does is it makes us think about something. And the answer is, how important are they? How important to see a levitating human being in front of me in order for me to understand? Is that what religion really is about? Is religion about throwing a staff and turning it into a snake? Is religion about being able to walk through walls and seeing ghostly figures and sleeping and seeing a dream of a person coming to you and saying, you're great, tomorrow you're going to be in heaven? Is that what religion is about? These are parts of it, but is that the main essence of religion? Is that what it's meant to give us? Is religion meant to be where we open a book and we read it and we say, well, now this book gives me this guidance, so I should follow it in this way? Or we read a book and we hear some stories where they might not fit into our scientific realm, but we immediately accept them. And the idea is that what religion is about? Is it possible, perhaps, to look at a deeper, more metaphorical meaning of what a miracle might mean or what it might symbolize? Perhaps that maybe is a figure of understanding. As much as it's important to take certain things literally, maybe certain things are meant to be taken metaphorically. Well, now I can see this as a principle behind it. And what we said specifically when we spoke about 2-3 nights ago, we said if we look at the Quran, there are verses which are abrogated, meaning verses which have been changed. And it's as if Allah is telling us, it's not the law that's sacred, it's the principle behind the law that's sacred. It's the principles behind the Quran which are meant to be extremely, extremely sacred. But what we do is we hold on to such a literal understanding that the principle of the message gets faded. We don't see the message anymore. Basic example is Imam Hussein and Ashura. When we look at the stories concocted over Imam Hussein's idea, you would hear some outrageous stories. He killed 30,000, he killed 60,000, then he jumped up, he did a backflip in 5 hours, then he came back down. We have so many different stories, and we bring these things in because for us, it feels good, and what we do is we miss the complete message or the picture. And that's a problem. Because now all of a sudden, religion is not this practical system of things which should improve our life. It becomes a system of esoterics. It's all about the esoterics. Let me try to reach this esoteric level where I start seeing miracles. That's great. But let's focus on groundworks first. Let's at least establish who we are, what we're doing here, why we're doing what we do, who brought us here. Let's establish the basic things before we start getting all esoteric. That's important. But there's a more interesting and deeper level which we have to realize before we get there. And that is, what's religion about? Is religion about miracles? Is it about taking a string and playing with it in front of people and letting them see that this is a snake and then people believe? There has to be something deeper. In my opinion, what's the biggest miracle is not that you can take a feat of nature and completely revolutionize it. But what's a miracle is you as an individual change a complete society, you change the way they think, and you change every single thing about them. Let me give one basic historic example. As we know, today is the death of Lady Khadija alayhi salam, and we commemorate the death of this great lady. And I'll tell you why in my eyes she's so great. There's a reason why I hold on to her memory and her thought. Sometimes we can grasp the idea that, well, the Prophet came with many miracles. He came with, one of his miracles was the Quran, was a book of poetry. Another miracle was, some might say, spelling the moon. Other miracles will say, the sun came back for Imam Ali and the Prophet. We have these different miracles which we discussed. Or Imam Ali lifting a big gate. Now, as much as that's important to some of us, in my opinion, one of the biggest miracles that ever existed within Arabia, forget these esoterics or the things which are out of the extreme, the miracle as we might call it, which in my opinion, as much as it proves something, it doesn't really change the inner core of the person. A person seeing a miracle doesn't say, oh my God, I've now realized the truth, I gotta stop lying. Most of the time, it's a nice jitter, it's a nice medication for a moment or a while, and then the person will go back to the same way he was. Great example is the example we just talked about of Bani Israel. Look at a lady like Khadija, and look at the society she comes from. When you see a society which is completely male-dominated and under such a system of patriarchy, where every single move, action, control is controlled by a male. A woman couldn't even walk outside of her house without even being spoken to or given granted permission by a male. A woman, if her husband dies, she was such, to the Arabians, was such a worthless being that she was actually given as dowry to the son of the husband who had just passed away. She doesn't even have autonomy to go out and to say, well, I'd like to do what I want to do with my life. It was such a male-dominated society that women were simply buried alive, as we discussed. To go further than that, women were sold as slaves in the markets. As simply as you might go, let's say 3-4 hours outside of Dearborn to certain rural areas, you'll find people who are selling animals and selling different things, and women were sold that way. Look at the system whereby these people live. Now you want to talk about a miracle, you want to hear a miracle? Forget the things that we just talked about. Those are nice on the side. Let's talk about changing human thought. Let's talk about changing human perception. Let's talk about changing worldview. Look at this woman who within this system of such patriarchy and a male-dominated society is known as the richest businesswoman in Arabia. And to such a level that her caravans were so massive that all of the male traders, their caravans put together, were not even matching her caravan as it left Arabia. That's how successful she was. Now you want to talk about a miracle, you want to talk about a paradigm shift, you want to talk about a change of worldview and a thorn in the eye of a person who is supporting such a system? Look at this miracle. Look at the change that seeing a beacon, what this beacon of hope does. Not only that, because within the Arabian system, sex slaves were traded at a very, very rapid pace. And things like brothel houses were extremely prevalent. Matter of fact, back then, a house, you know how today we have something called the red light district. That comes from a specific understanding from way back when, where any female who had indecent actions in her house would have a red X on top of her house, and people would know this is a house for this specific act. And for a woman like Khadija to be known as a lady of chastity, because think about the poverty. When a country has poverty, when an area is so poor, when a woman does not find another person to marry specifically within that society, that's why when the messenger came, some people ask, well, why didn't he marry 9 wives? Or why didn't he marry specific wives? One of the reasons was that he brought women forward next to him so that he would break this system in society where if a woman gets divorced or she's a widow, she can't get married again. And hence he married widows, and he married orphans, and he married specific individuals who were looked down upon in society to break that shift. Because after women were divorced or their husbands died, they were forced into things like prostitution because they had nothing else to do. That's how things would work. That's why Allah in the Quran says, don't force your daughters into specific acts like this, because Allah surely will send them individuals to help them in society. What was happening is the society was just ransacked. Now, keeping all of this in mind, keeping all of the patriarchy, all of the pressure, all of the abuse, all of the houses of prostitution and these things, and you immediately shift your gaze toward this woman, which completely revolutionizes this society and picks it up from the ground up. Not only that, but you got the man who changes the complete society, saying that if it wasn't for her, I would have never been able to do a single thing. Now that's even more powerful. Because now not only do you have the greatest woman in that society, but you've got the greatest man. And they come together, changing this whole system, revolutionizing it. In my opinion, that's a miracle. Let's be more open-minded in the sense, the things we follow are so petty. They are, in my opinion, they are so petty. Yes, it's important that animals were put in a boat and the boat was taken. Instead of taking time to prove the validity of that and emphasizing on that so much, let's shift to something else. Let's look at changing our worldview. Let's look at changing the paradigm which we live by. And that, in my opinion, is much more important. Because the minute I realize that I need to change the paradigm which I live by, I now all of a sudden expand my worldview. Okay, just to connect it back to what we were discussing yesterday, when we discussed empathy, and it brings towards a discussion specifically with regards to the system of patriarchy which we have, and that's, if you really look at the system by which we're working with right now, there is very, very small room for respect. There's a very, very small room for respect. Now, as much as we say, it's very nice to say with a cold heart, I respect everybody from another faith, I respect a sister even if she doesn't wear hijab, I respect a brother even if he doesn't pray, I respect this individual this way, I respect this. There's this built-in system, or this pride, I want to call it pride because I think that's what it is, this pride which is, I've got the right religion and everybody else is kind of on the side, okay? And yesterday's discussion, specifically with regards to the miracles which we have, just to kind of wrap things together, what it does to us is it allows us to now move or shift from a level of tolerance to respect. That's why whenever I speak about prostitution in Arabia, my discussion isn't they're bad, and they're evil and they should be shunned to hell. No. Because there's a reason why things like this happen. When we talk about, by the way, this doesn't only happen in this society. This happened even in Europe. In Europe, there were specific historic incidents where women were thought to be witches, and they were taken and they were thrown in the water and they were forced to sink. That's how it happened, because women were thought to be witches at that time. Any woman who was higher than a male in power, any woman who was higher than a male in any sort of wealth or income, was thought to be a witch, and she was casted away, killed, beaten, tortured, and just thrown in the sea. That's how they would do it. That has happened in many different societies. But what I'm trying to get to is, when we open this paradigm of understanding, and no longer is it because I've got this miracle and I can prove it, or because there's this miracle here, hence I am the true religion, that's it, it's completed. Because in Muharram, for example, some blood comes out of the shrine of Imam Hussein, I must have the right religion and that's it, there's no need to look at anything else. These are all nice things, but there's something much deeper towards our belief than that. That can't be it. That can't be simply how it is. And what I'm saying, what I'm suggesting or proposing, is that there's a movement towards something called respect. Now, it's very generic to say respect, but there's a huge difference between this idea of tolerance and respect. There's something known as the iceberg model, which when I kind of read about it, really changed the way that I see things. And the iceberg model says that human interaction is limited to only 10% of what we see. So when I meet a person, and I see their physical movements, I see their interactions, I see their face, I see their facial expressions, I see everything they say, I'm only limited to really 10% of what that person is or what he's about. And the iceberg model says that 90% of humans are hidden underneath the 10%. Meaning when you look at an iceberg, you only see the tip or the 10% of it. You don't see the 90% which is completely submerged underwater, because that's really where all the substance is. And human beings are the same way. Things like emotion, things like past, things like trauma, things like experiences, things like family issues, things like emotional issues, things like so many different things, financial issues, health issues, all of these things are hidden underneath that 10% which we don't see, and it's called the emotional appeal of humans. Now, what we do at times is we put so much emphasis on the exterior, and we've completely forgotten and neglected the 90% which is on the inside. And that can be so problematic, because how many times do we have it? And I speak to us as an honest community. I'm not here to say, let's bring everybody in and let's be happy and dandy, because that's not the reality. Let's not lie to ourselves. We walk down the street as individuals, we see a woman who's not wearing hijab, and our immediate response is, may Allah save her from hell. Sometimes that's how we think of it. Or we're walking down the street, we see a brother who's walking with a girl, and our immediate response is, this guy is probably no good. He's probably doing something haram, God knows. Typically, our understanding is like this. We become so judgmental. Or if we see somebody doing something wrong, we're immediately ready to jump at them, like, you're going to hell and I'm going to heaven. Let me show you how I can help you enter heaven. And that was the whole purpose of the discussion we've been having for the past week about religions, and why just because I'm a Muslim does not make me the best human being out there, because I'm trying to get us to see that there's more to a human being than simply the outer exterior belief of I'm part of this religion or I'm part of this religion. All we need to do is examine the 90% which is on the inside, which we typically don't talk about. A lot of the times we talk to people, our discussions are extremely one way, meaning tell me about this, or tell me about this, very material, petty things. We don't really look at a person and say, well, tell me how you feel about this. Or tell me how this makes you feel. How does this part of religion make you feel? How does this action make you feel? Or why is it that you decided to take this action in your life and not this action? Let the person talk about the 90% which is underneath. Because that 90% is where most human beings are hidden. And we don't show each other that. Everyone sitting in this room right now has that specific close person who brings out that 90%. And that 90% is so crucial, because that's where all the understanding comes in. That's where all the worldview changing happens. That's where the emotional bonding and the understanding of our realities happens. It's through that 90%. But very rarely do we tap into that 90%. And perhaps instead of seeing a person who's walking down the street without hijab, and we say, well, may Allah guide her, instead of having that approach, maybe a better approach would be to say, let me get to know this person because she may be better than me. And I may be able to learn from her, and maybe through our discussion understand, why doesn't she do things the way that I do things? And why do I really do things the way she doesn't do things? And perhaps she can challenge me, and I can grow as an individual or a human being. Or a brother walking down the street and sees another guy, let's say, who, basic example, doesn't pray. Okay? And the guy looks at this person and says, well, why don't you pray? What's the reason? And his response is, I don't want to pray. Typically it's like, well, this guy's less religious than I am, or has less faith than I do. I'm probably a greater human being than he is. But to take that simple step and to try to unravel that 90%, say, well, what's caused you to move away from this? What's really pained you in such a way where now you're hiding behind this 10% and you don't want to bring out the 90% which is underneath? And if we just take the time to bring out that 90% of most human beings, which is the emotion, the thought process, the thinking, the trauma, the history behind the person, it will really change the way that we think about things and see things. I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to keep us on the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على